All right. Well, it's great to see you guys. And I guess it's already been a month since we were together. But I really enjoyed being able to fellowship with you again together. After Philippines, I was there for 30 days. Then I went to Myanmar for about a week or so. I was able to minister with the brothers there. TMAI has a training center there as well in Myanmar. And so that was my first trip there. So that was a nice to be able to fellowship with them as well. So I just got back home. What is today? I got back home. Today's yesterday. That's like so. Just settling back in. So what I wanted to do was to spend the time we have in between now and the next module doing a couple of things. Primarily just kind of going over some of the key concepts we learned when we were together, and then look at the assignments, sort of go through those assignments just to make sure they're clear, hopefully, and that if you have any questions about them, but also too, the prophetic genre is the most difficult. And so these messages you have on Zechariah, Revelation, your assigned passages, this is going to be a bigger challenge than you've had up to this point. And so I want to make sure we can spend some time together and really encourage you to be working on the assignments, not just so that you'll be get them done, but because I think when you have questions about them, we can answer them now rather than waiting till later when you may not have the opportunity to ask questions about your passage. And so I really want to encourage you to do that. So I've posted, I believe all the assignments are posted now on Canvas, so you can work through those. All right, but here's my goal for today. Today's class is to basically, I want to, oops, this should be assignment number. Zechariah. Okay. Is these four things, probably we'll only get to the first three since we started a little bit late. But I want to go over, just overview of the assignments and the class schedule, just sort of what to expect here the next few months together. Then look at the assignments, just an overview, and then talk about some of the key things that we discussed when I was with you regarding the prophetic genre. There's a few things I want to just go over with you again to make sure they're clear. And then if we have time, we'll start looking at that first assignment, okay? And together, we'll go through another book together as an example, the book of Obadiah. It's a short book. It's one of the shortest books in the Old Testament. I think it's actually the shortest book in the Old Testament. So, but it's a prophetic book, so I want to use that as sort of an example to go through the steps with you over the course of our Zoom classes together. Okay, so first, just want to look at the proposed schedule for these next several months together. Of course, early October is when we had Module 4, and we were able to meet together. You preached your poetry sermons, and then also we started the discussion, the lectures on the prophetic genre for Module 4. And so that was October 3rd to 7th. And now, today, November 15th, we're starting, resuming our Zoom classes to go over some of the key concepts on prophecy, the prophetic genre, and then also go over the assignments together, just to go through each of them an example so that you have that to help with going forward, working on the assignments. Now, I've sort of put this date out for you guys. I would encourage you to target the end of the year to be done with all of your assignments for the first 3 modules. I've noticed some of you guys have been working at that, and that's really good. So try to make a goal to be done completely by the end of the year with all your module 1, 2, and 3 assignments, except for the sermons. If you have to preach a sermon from those, we'll make that up at the next module, module 5 in May. But as far as the written assignments and the reading assignments, go ahead and make sure those are done by the end of the year. All right, that's my encouragement to you. Keep going on the module 4 assignments though. So if you finished modules 1, 2, and 3, don't stop or wait. Just be working on the module 4 assignments as well. We'll have Zoom classes from now until December 13th. So the next, I don't know what that is, the next 5 or 6 weeks. Then we'll take a break for the holidays, and then resume back in actually not January 10th. I will be in Pakistan. That should be the 17th, I believe. So we'll basically take about a month break from Zoom from mid-December to mid-January. So again, that to give you time also to keep working on the assignments. And then we'll resume our Zoom classes on January 17th, and we'll go through February. In March, I have several trips planned, so we won't be able to do that. We may have a couple of meetings in April. We'll see how that goes. All right. But then all your module 4 assignments need to be completed by mid-April, because May 1st is when we're going to have our module 5 class in person. That's where you're going to preach your prophecy sermons, and I would add also preach makeup sermons. All right, from modules 1 to 3, if you haven't done that yet. All right, so that will take place for that particular module, module 5, preach makeup sermons. All right, and then, Lord willing, we'll try to get the module 6 scheduled for probably sometime in October. All right, this is tentative. All right, and that would be our last class, module 6, where you'll have 1 sermon assigned, not 2, so you have a little less work to do for that module. And then we're going to focus on the pastoral ministries. And then if you're finished all your assignments, then Lord willing, on Saturday, October 14th, we will have our graduation service together. All right, for those of you that get your assignments done. So just as an encouragement in that regard. All right, so that's sort of the that's the overview here for the next several months going forward. Any questions on that? I will type this up and send it to you after the class this morning. The main thing I want you to be centered on is the these due dates here. The end of the year to get all your module 1 to 3 assignments done, and then April 16th to have your module 4 assignments completed. Okay. All right. Questions on the schedule? Hopefully that makes sense. So plan is to meet weekly at this same time from now until December 13th. And then we'll take a break and then pick it up from mid-January to the end of February. That's what we'll do our Zoom classes, okay? All right. Good. So that's the schedule. And then here's the assignments that are in your syllabus. Just wanted to bring them once more to your attention. We have the 8 reading assignments. They're all related to the prophetic genre. So you could get working on those. They've been posted on Canvas. And I've seen that some of you have started reading through these. So these are all supplemental for the prophetic genre. And then here are the exegetical assignments, your written assignments. And notice you have two passages. You have Zechariah and Revelation. You'll have one passage from each of those books for your sermon. And then we've got each of these assignments that is put together to prepare you for the study of each of those passages. Okay? And again, for the most part, they're going to be the same thing you've been doing for the first 3 modules. The only difference, the biggest difference, will be the prophetic passage analysis, which is what we covered in class together. That will be a new feature, a new step that you'll be working on for these particular passages. But the other steps are going to be essentially the same that you've been doing already for your previous books. All right. Now, these are larger books, so we're not dealing with we're not in Colossians or Jonah or Ruth or a Psalm. These are much larger books, so keep that in mind. That's why I would say make sure you start working on these assignments now, because Zechariah is a much longer book. So you're going to need to be reading through the whole book for the first couple of assignments on that. Same with Revelation. Revelation's a big book. So the first part of the first steps are dealing with the whole book. Okay. So these reflect all the assignments for module 4. So we've got 21 assignments in total, 8 reading, and then the rest are written. Okay. And again, these are in your syllabus. And these are the assignments we'll be going through together as we spend time on Zoom. I'll cover some of the key concepts, and then we'll look at the assignment, go through an example using Obadiah for you. And then in class, we went through an example of Haggai. And, so that reminds me, let me show you this. Let me pull up. Okay. So if we go to just want to go to Canvas here, log in. Module 4, CDO. All right. So if you go to, again, remember I told you that the place where we're going to keep a lot of the files is here. And I put in the syllabus for your student syllabus, the one you had for class, and then the teacher syllabus, which includes all the exercise notes as well. So you can go to there, and pull up the teacher syllabus. All right, and this has, it's everything that's in your student syllabus, but it also includes, if you remember at the end of class, or in class, we had the exercise in Haggai. Remember that? So I put all of that information here in the syllabus, if I can find it. It should be the appendix. Yeah, there we are. Okay, so remember that we went through the example for Haggai. So I have all of that detail here in these notes for you. That wouldn't be in your student notes. Yeah, there we go. So the diagram, textual observations, background context, all of that. And this information, the background context especially, is going to be helpful for you with your Zechariah assignment because they share a lot of the same background. Okay, so that is on Canvas. Again, you go to the download all course files, and then right here, I'll have that. And then I'll just, as I have been done in the past, whenever we have a Zoom session, I'll put that information as well. I'll put the video link here, and then I'll also put the notes that we cover in the Zoom session here. All right. And then your assignments, if you go over to the assignment section, you'll notice that I've got all the reading assignments and written assignments. Where's the reading ones? Yeah. So here's all the reading assignments, and then the written assignments are here as well. I don't know why they're out of order here, but you can get those, okay? So for example, if we go to the first assignment, start the assignment, you'll have that, yeah. And notice for these articles, per Alex's request, I went through and tried to reorient them so they're not the weird sideways and all that. So hopefully you can read them a lot more easily now. So I notice here I put the pages oriented so you don't have to rotate your device, okay? So that was just for you, Alex.
Thanks, Pastor Tim.
Yeah, sorry about that in the past. I know that was a real hassle, but I figured out how to use the PDF software to rotate them so they're easier to read. Okay, so all your assignments should be oriented, all the reading assignments, to make them easier to read. Okay. All right. So that's all the assignments here. They're all the written, all the reading assignments I've posted for you. Okay. All right. And then you should have, you can go up, and the grades for your preaching assignment should also be here as well. Okay. All right, so that's just to show you that I posted all the assignments, examples for them, so they're all online. So you can just continue to work ahead at your pace for that, okay? Questions on that? I know this is a little dry, it's just administrative details, but I want to make sure you have all the information that you need for doing these assignments together, or doing these assignments for your okay. All right, good. Now, let me go over a few items from the class that I think are, I want to make sure they're clear because they are important when we're studying the prophetic genre. So I call these the key aspects of the prophetic genre. But these are some things I want to, again, bring to your attention just in preparation as you go through studying for your Zechariah and Revelation sermons. The first is, in focusing on the Old Testament prophets, there are several key features or key aspects or characteristics of the prophetic books. And if you remember the 4 F's, the form, the forthtelling, the foretelling, and figurative. Okay, those are 4 words beginning with F that I think can help to define or describe the key features or characteristics of the prophetic books. And when we talk about form, just remember that prophetic books usually contain several different genres, even within the same book. And I'll show you a table of that in a little bit. But remember, these are not like narrative where, it's mainly story, or the poetry genre where it's mainly poetic use. Prophecy can incorporate all of those. It can have sermons, which are direct instruction. They can be poetic. They can use figurative language and imagery. They can have narrative features, dialogue or describing events. And then, of course, they have future events that are being foretold often. And so there's a mixture of these different genres, and you have to recognize that if you're going to properly interpret that particular book. So, and as we looked at in class, if your book may have some narrative features, it may have some dialogue, or it may have some narrator comments or events being described. So you have to take note of that as you're studying the passage. There may be poetic language that is used. So you're going to have to identify figures of speech or the images that are being used, or perhaps other poetic devices. Or again, there may be direct instruction, like in the sermon, or like an epistle is a direct didactic instruction. And so that will be, you have to take that into account as well as you're studying these books. And then, of course, there's prophetic parts to the book that we have to recognize as well. Okay? So just keep in mind the prophetic books, the form of those prophetic books, they contain a number of different genres. And then also, as we discussed together, there's the forthtelling element within the prophetic books. And that is, we need to remember this, that for the most part, the prophetic books, the Old Testament prophetic books, are essentially a compilation of sermons that the prophet had collected, put together in the form of a book with a particular purpose. And these sermons are direct, they're instructive, they are exhorting. Usually they have a rebuke for sinful behavior, a warning of consequences as a result, the call to repentance, and then often a promise of future restoration. But remember, again, the books are primarily a sermon or parts of sermons that were delivered. So they were written, they were given to us, not just to tell us about future events, but actually to describe for us messages directed to their present day audience, to the audience of the prophet. All right. Again, I think we described them, Fee and Stewart described the prophets as covenant enforcers. And so their main job wasn't to tell the future. That's not why God appointed them. Their main job was to call the people of Israel, to call them to be faithful to the Mosaic covenant, and to rebuke them when they weren't, and to remind them of God's promises, remind them of the consequences for sin, but also remind them of his promises for them as a nation. And so their focus, just like ours as preachers, is forthtelling. That's what they were. They were essentially preachers who at times spoke of future events. And if you remember, and that brings us to the next F, foretelling, is those future events are related, connected to the message in the present. And as we talked about, the future events that the prophet was given by the Lord was not just for them to know what was going to happen, but in some way that future event or those future events were directly connected to the message that the prophet was preaching. And so Joel, for example, right, he was preaching after the locust plague, and he spoke of a future plague a future army that would bring much worse consequences than the locust army did if they didn't repent. And so he did speak of a future judgment coming if they didn't turn from their sin. And then he does also describe the day of the Lord when God will bring that judgment not just upon Israel, but all the nations. And so we have to remember that as the prophet was forthtelling, he often also was foretelling, speaking of future events. And the challenge is those future events could have been near in time or far in time. And so that's sometimes a challenge in interpreting these prophetic books is what time period is the prophet speaking of? Something that was going to take place in the generation of his hearers, or a near future generation, or is it events in the far future? And again, the timing of those events is not as important as how that event or those events connected to the prophet's message to his audience. And we saw example of that in Micah 4 and 5, right? We went through in class where he went back and forth in time, going far in the future, then the near future, then the far future, then the intermediate future. He was going back and forth because he was trying to describe events in the future related to the message he was delivering in the present. And he wasn't trying to piece together a sequence of events in the future, because he had them all out of order. He went to remember, he went to the millennial kingdom, and then he went back to the Babylonian exile, then he went forward to Armageddon, then he went back to the end of the exile, then he went back to the incarnation. So he was all over the place. But his goal wasn't a sequential timeline. His goal was to describe certain things that happened in the future because it related to God, how God was going to do a work among his people and deliver them. Okay? So we have form, that is different genres. We have forthtelling, that is usually the prophets were a collection of sermons. Then we have foretelling, which is the future events that are given in some of those sermons. And then finally, the fourth F is figurative. Again, the prophetic books, because they usually are highly emotional and describe very graphic events in the future, they are often use poetic language. They use imagery, symbolism, things like that. Okay. Thoughts or comments on that? This I know is just by way of review, so. But anything, questions you guys have or thoughts before we move forward?
Is the preaching today prophetic preaching? Foretelling? It's not telling the future, but it is exhortation.
Oh, like what we do as preachers, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, we would be primarily forthtelling, right?
Yes, right.
But some of the passages that we might preach may speak of future events. So we wouldn't be prophesying the future, but we would be explaining someone else who prophesied of the future, right? If you're preaching from Zechariah or Revelation, you're going to be doing that. So we aren't being given future events ourselves. But we would be communicating future events given to one of the biblical author.
That is one of the explanation. Consider the pastors or prophets of the New Testament. I know we studied that before. The prophets during the time of Paul there is no written in scripture yet, but we have the scripture.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah. And so yeah, we would be primarily forth tellers, if you want to use the same terms, preaching sermons, to our present day hearers and explaining the text to them. We aren't being given new revelation, or we are not being given new prophecies, but at times we may preach on a prophetic text which has future events in it. So that part would be foretelling. But yeah, the New Testament prophets, some of them may have been given future events. I mean, we have the book of Revelation for one. Paul, in First Thessalonians, Second Thessalonians, he revealed, and First Corinthians 15, he reveals future events. Of course, Jesus did in Matthew 24. Peter, 2 Peter 3. So there are many examples in the New Testament books where they did speak of future events within the context of their writings, even within the epistles. But we as preachers today, all we're doing is simply teaching from what's already been written. Does that address your question, Noor? Or
yeah, yes, yes, Mr. Tim. Thank you. Yes,
okay,
thank you.
okay, good. Any other thoughts or questions? All right. Again, this is by way of review. Hopefully this isn't new. This doesn't sound new, what we're talking about. Hopefully it stirs your mind to remember what we covered in class. But these are some important aspects that I wanted to make sure were fresh on your minds as we go forward together. Another key element is the understanding, recognizing the historical context of the prophetic books. And I'm speaking here again mainly of the Old Testament prophets. One of the confusing things about them is not just the language used and the future events, but often it's easy to get lost as to when did this prophet live, and who was he prophesying to, and what king was in power at the time. Often it's hard to place historically where these prophets were. And so I put this table together. It's in your syllabus. I just repeated it here, but I think it's an important one to keep handy, to keep ready, that you can look at, where I put the prophets, the writing prophets, in the order I believe they ministered. And this I adapted from Pastor MacArthur's, his Bible commentary, the study Bible, and then a couple of other books. I just sort of compiled all these together to put this chart together here. But here I have all the prophets, and then the king, the ruler at the time, and then some key references, passages that give us this information. All right. So this way you can sort of have an idea of when each of these prophets ministered. And then I also, in the yellow highlight, is I just put in like the big events in Israel's history. So the separation of the northern and southern kingdoms. And you can see that all of the writing prophets came after that particular event, after Israel and Judah split. Then we had Obadiah, Joel, Jonah, Amos, and Hosea. And you'll notice some of these prophets overlapped a little bit. Jonah and Amos prophesied under the reign of Jeroboam II. Hosea also prophesied right at the end of their ministries. Then we have the Assyrian exile, and Isaiah and Hosea prophesied at that time period, as did Micah. And then they were followed by Nahum, Zephaniah, Jeremiah, and Habakkuk. And notice Jeremiah spans the Babylonian exile. So does Ezekiel. So those two prophets prophesied at the same time. And Daniel as well, by the way, was also, the book of Daniel takes place during the exile as well. In fact, Daniel's mentioned in the book of Ezekiel. Okay. Then we have the temple reconstruction, and that's where Haggai and Zechariah come along. And then finally, Nehemiah rebuilds the wall, and I think many believe Malachi followed him as far as okay. So this table just sort of gives you reference points as to when each prophet, when he ministered. Okay. And I also put on this table who the prophet was speaking of or preaching to. I included that as well to reference. Okay. So again, this table is in your syllabus. I'll provide it in your handout again as well, so that you have that as a reference point. Okay. And then we're focusing our time in the book of Zechariah for your assignment. So that's obviously during the after the exile, during the temple reconstruction. Okay. And one other thing to keep in mind that we discussed in the class is, as you think about the author is believed to be, and for every book, the author is the prophet. Jonah and Habakkuk, or Haggai, excuse me. Those are the two books that there may be another author besides the prophet who wrote it, but I believe that the prophet is the most likely author. The audience, remember, there could be more than one audience, right? You guys remember that? There's the audience that the prophet was preaching to, and sometimes that's not the same audience that the prophet was writing to. So you just have to keep that in mind as you're interpreting the book. You'll first have okay, who was the prophet preaching to? That's his audience. Now, the audience he's writing to may not be the same one. We, considered, for example, the Gospel of John. That the audience that Jesus preached to was, during the time of his ministry, but the people that John wrote to lived 60 years after that. Right? Because his book was written about 60 years after the resurrection. So you have to keep in mind, there's the audience being written to, and then there's the audience that was being spoken to in the book. Okay. And so it can be this, that can be the case also in the prophetic books. So just keep that in mind. All right. Questions? All right, again, hopefully that's straightforward. All right. One last element here, and that is, and I've already brought this up, but just by way of reminder, that the prophetic books, again, contain a variety of genres within the book. And here I put this table together, which again is also in your syllabus, but it sort of breaks down the different genres within each of the prophetic books. And I included Daniel in this particular table just so you would have it. But notice there's typically a variety of genres. Rarely do we have just the exact same genre like Obadiah is one and Haggai is another, where it's pretty consistent. But even in Haggai, we have some elements of it's sermons being delivered, but they're being delivered with narrative features, and within the sermon we have prophetic elements. All right, so even though there 4 sermons make up the book of Haggai, even within the sermon we have a variety of genres. So Revelation also, right? It starts with narrative in the first chapter. Chapters 2 and 3 take the form of an epistles, and then the rest of the book is prophetic. We might say apocalyptic for the most part. All right. So that's just as a point of reference. And so, for example, Jonah, if you look at Jonah, where is Jonah? There he is. Jonah here, right, is primarily narrative, but he also contains a psalm within the book. Okay. So keep that in mind. And again, that will affect sort of how we approach studying it. And we looked at that in step 4 of the exegetical process, where you begin by, before you look at the prophetic aspects, you first ask, okay, is there any narrative features here? And you might note that. So then you would want to identify characters, and then perhaps if there's a scene or scenes being described. And then you ask yourself, are there any poetic features? You may need to identify figurative language or figures of speech or images that are being used. And then you would focus attention on the prophetic parts of the book, any future events being described. And remember, there were 3 kinds of prophetic writings. In fact, Joel has all 3. There's the judgment oracle, notice the salvation oracle, and the apocalyptic. So Joel actually has one of each of those prophetic forms of prophetic genre. Okay, remember the judgment oracle just focuses on judgment. Salvation oracle is a restoration or deliverance being described. And then apocalyptic is typically a judgment, but it's a much more fanciful, graphic, descriptive, destructive, sort of fanciful creatures usually are contained in the apocalyptic form of the prophetic genre. Revelation has many examples of that. Okay. So that's just, again, something to keep in mind. Okay. Any thoughts about that? Again, sorry for just doing a review here, but I want to sort of refresh our minds, get us thinking again about what we talked about a month ago, because I know sometimes it's easy to forget those things, but we covered a lot more, obviously, in our time then, but you can go through your notes. But I wanted to highlight a few things I think are important to remember before we start going through the assignments together. So I know I did most of the talking here, but any questions that you guys might have before we go forward? Okay. Well, what I'd like to do is we won't have time to start, I think, today because we've got a little bit of a late start, but I'm going to have us go through the book of Obadiah, as I mentioned before, just to practice going through each of the steps. And so if you could read through it, it's only like 20 verses, I think, 21 verses, pretty short. If you could read through that in preparation for our meeting next week, that would really help us in our discussion to make it go better, I think. So just read through the book of Obadiah a few times, get familiar with it. And we'll start going through that together as our example book for going through the process together. And then we'll cover each of the assignments and just make sure that everything's clear on what you need to do in completing those going forward, okay? And then two, if you do have any questions on anything you're working on, feel free to bring that up. I hope to spend a few weeks, Lord willing, on maybe a passage or two, a prophetic text, just talk about eschatology a little bit together as well. So we won't just do assignments, but maybe spend a little time in, I think, Daniel 9, for example, maybe Revelation. We'll see how much time we have, but I'd like to cover a couple of passages just in a little more detail to talk about end times stuff, get into a little bit of eschatology as well. Okay. So I think you'll find that fun as well. But next week, let's get started. We'll start working on the first assignment together, an example of it from using Obadiah. All right. And then maybe find out what happened to our brothers. I know Kazot said the power went out, so he dropped off, but we'll see. I don't know if anyone heard from Michael or from Brilio.
I contacted Michael, and he will be available next week.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I contact him.
How about Brilio? Anybody hear from him?
I'm not sure because his wife was in the hospital.
Oh,
Yeah, yes.
oh, is she
So-
okay?
They have to go through surgery for his wife.
Okay.
Yeah, we pray for him. Pastor Tim,
Yeah.
would we ask your permission? At least there are two, maybe can sit in the class. One of them is Pastor Revion.